Welcome to the Athlon Sports Preseason Top 25 official release for 2024. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on twitter.com at Braden Gall.
And I'm Stephen Lassan. You can follow me on twitter.com as well at Athlon Stephen. And as always, Stephen L. CFB on Facebook and Instagram.
There you have it. Look, I enjoy doing shows with you, Stephen, that are every single year. Like, I love the Dream Road Trip. I love all the things that we do. Coaches on the Hot Seat, Anonymous Coaching Scouting Report, all kinds of stuff. I love all those shows. But the top 25 is the baby, man. The top 25 is the thing that we work so hard on for over almost 20 years now. We've been doing this, putting the Athlon Sports Magazine together and releasing our preseason top 25. We're going to work our way through all 25 teams and some teams that maybe just missed the top 25. But I do want to ask you first and foremost, because I get asked this all the time. I'm sure you do as well. It used to be, hey, what is this, a power ranking? Is this preseason? Is it how they look on paper? Is this how you're going to? And we used to always say, this is how we are projecting the season to play out and how the team is going to finish. And before the 14 playoff, that was easier to do. Then the 14 playoff happened, and it was a little trickier to do because maybe we think a team is going to finish as a 3 seed or a 4 seed, but could go on and win the tournament. So I'll ask you first, with our top 25, is our top 25 and the top 12 how we think the season is going to finish? Or is it more of a power ranking now? How has the 12-team playoff affected the rankings?
It is a projection of the college football playoff. This is how we think the playoff is going to look in December. There's also a little bit of power rating involved too. Like once you get outside, I think like the top 12 or so, you start, especially when you get into some of these group of 5 leagues and you start trying to rank them 26 through 134. It is some power rating involved. So it's a little bit of both. I will say also, Braden, this was also, I think, our toughest year doing the rankings, just because of all the changes that are going on in the sport. You mentioned the playoff. There's also all the conference realignment. You also have a lot of transfers in some of these group of 5 leagues that made it very difficult. Sometimes the prediction may have changed from Monday to Friday in some leagues. So I think by far, we've said this before, but this is by far, I think, our toughest year doing the Athlon Sports Top 25 and 134.
Now, that being said, it is a projection, but it's not the top 12 is not the order with which we think the committee will slot the teams, correct?
That is correct. So if you look at our top 12, that sort of kind of goes to our power rating. Like we think that when you look at the college football playoff rankings on December, we think this is how the committee is going to rank them. It is not how the playoff is going to look, thanks to the conference championship. So when you look at our rankings, the Big 12 and ACC champ are moving up, and that hurts teams like from the Big 10 and SEC who might be 3, 4, 5 in the rankings. They will move down. So the 134 kind of reflects before, I guess, the playoff actually seeds the teams. And
right.
If you look later in our magazine, there is a full bracket about how we think this college football playoff plays out.
Yes, because there is no group of 5 team in our preseason top 25. But we know a group of 5 team is going to get that 12 seed probably of all the teams in college football. So that is a difference, though, for this year's magazine, is that this is a little bit more of how we view. It is a projection for the season, and it is a projection for the end of the season, but it's not exactly picking the playoff the way the average fan is going to see a bracket unfold. So that's why, again, we have another page in the magazine this year. So that is a first for us at Athlon, for sure.
Well, I also think on the group of 5 thing, you and I have talked this offseason, especially about some of the teams that have moved up from G5 to P5. So there is a little bit of, I think, a bad word for it, maybe like talent drain. Like some of the top group of 5 teams have moved up. I do think when you start looking at some of those teams, it would not surprise me at all if one finishes. I mean, Liberty is very capable of doing so. Boise, Memphis, pick your American team. So this goes to the power rating thing. I think one group of 5 team probably finishes in there, but again, when you look at the power ratings, you kind of look at some of our projections, it's going to be right there on the edge. A lot of these teams in 15 through 40 are just so close on the razor's edge. Flip a win or 2 here and there, easily move into our top 25.
So let's go 1 to 25, or maybe we'll go 1 to 12, and then maybe we'll switch it up. But I do want to ask you about teams that did not make it, and I'll give you the names here, 26 through 30. You already mentioned Liberty. Liberty's in that group. Iowa State is number 29. Much to the Cyclone's chagrin, the Iowa Hawkeyes at 28, Virginia Tech at 27, and West Virginia at 26. That's an interesting collection of teams, Steven. Some teams that have changed coaches recently, and Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah, there's some actually, to our point earlier, there's a lot of good teams in this mix too. I think any of these teams, it wouldn't shock me if they finish in the top 25. We use sort of top 25 as kind of arbitrary. These teams are essentially top 25. It's not a ton of difference between like 23 and 30. But yeah, Liberty is our top ranked group of 5 team. They have that key game early in the season against Appalachian State. That'll be crucial to figuring out who that top group of 5 team is. Iowa State. I love the Iowa defense. We'll see about that offense. Again, that's a question mark this year. Iowa State, West Virginia fall into this category. There's a ton of really good Big 12 teams. Are they going to beat up on each other? Is it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 going to be able to merge in our top 25? We think so. But they're probably going to beat up on each other, which I think hurts the chances of West Virginia and Iowa State of getting in there. But if you're West Virginia, we're projecting you to finish 26th after last season. Your coach is on the hot seat. That's a pretty good deal, right? And we like Virginia Tech, I think, as a sleeper team in the ACC. We got them just outside the top 25.
Yeah, I like all those teams. I really like Iowa State, honestly. I think they could be sneaky good this year. Established culture, established coach. I should have said, Matt Campbell's been around a long time too. I think he's coached way more years at Iowa State than anyone cares to acknowledge. not because he's bad, but because we're all getting really old is what I'm getting at.
Well, also, too, I think credit to Matt Campbell last season, because before the season, there was the gambling scandal. They lost their starting quarterback. There was some, and here they go, end up, being a really solid team last year and having a good year. And this year they have a chance to be, even better than that with the returning personnel. So this gets at the whole thing with the Big 12. There are so many, 1 through 6, 7 is very clustered together, and there are some clusters after that. So switch a couple wins here and there. All of a sudden, Iowa State's a top 25 team.
All right, so we'll obviously focus on the top 2 for the national championship. We'll focus on the top 12 for the playoff, and we'll get to the entire top 25. But number 1 in our pick to win the national championship and be the last team standing, 3rd time in the last 4 years, the Georgia Bulldogs at number 1 and the Ohio State University at number 2. So that is our pick for the 2 teams to make it through the playoff and get to the national championship game. I think they are the 2 best teams on paper. I don't think there's really much discussion from number 3, 4, 5. I can see the case for other teams, but I think these are the best 2. There wasn't really a whole lot of discussion between us on these top 2, but I am curious. I have a very clear answer, but I'd like to know your answer. What is the difference between Georgia and Ohio State, and why do you have Georgia 1 and Ohio State 2?
I think number 1, let's start with the quarterback. I think Georgia's got an edge at quarterback with Carson Beck. I think Ohio State will be fine at quarterback, whether it's Will Howard or Devin Brown, Julian Sayin, whoever it is. They'll be fine. I just think that Carson Beck is the best returning quarterback in college football. Also, I think Georgia has an edge on the offensive line. Ohio State, I think, can be better with the returning personnel that they have. Didn't really bring in anybody in the portal that's going to be pushing for time. So it's basically who they had last year, experience, kind of maybe a little different tweak in the system with Chip Kelly now calling the plays. But I do think quarterback, offensive line is where Georgia's got an edge. I think in my mind, when I was going through these rankings, they were the clear top 2 teams in the country. There's a little bit of a gap between 3 and 4. But I think Ohio State and Georgia are clearly 1 and 2. And if you're Ohio State, it is get back to the top of the Big Ten with Michigan winning the last couple of years. And if you're Georgia, it's, I guess, a revenge tour. They won 2 out of the last 3 national championships, fell a little short last year. But I think this is the best returning team on paper, being Georgia.
And what's interesting is they don't necessarily, in our minds, have to finish 1 and 2 at the end of the regular season. That's not what this is. It's who do we think goes through the tournament and gets to the national championship game. It's Georgia and Ohio State. And honestly, that's sort of where the power poll meets the playoff rankings, and they kind of come together. And I agree with that. I think they're the best 2 teams on paper. Now, I would go one step further, because I think the difference is that at the 3 most important positions, Georgia is better. And it's not just Carson Beck in the offensive line. It is Kirby Smart versus Ryan Day. I would take Kirby Smart, Carson Beck, and the Georgia offensive line over Ryan Day, pick a quarterback and the offensive line. And so I think, to me, while I love everything about Ohio State's defense and the weapons around the quarterback, it is quarterback, head coach, O-line. Georgia gets the check in all 3 boxes, and that's why I agree with you that Georgia is number 1. But Ohio State's, I would not be surprised if Ohio State's your national champion at the end of the year. I just think you're asking a lot of Will Howard and Ryan Day, who have not proven themselves in those games yet.
I think if you think about this in a hypothetical Georgia-Ohio State matchup, I would check all those things in their favor. I think things to like about Ohio State, though, I think Quinshot Judkins and Travion Henderson's a pretty dang good backfield 1-2 punch. They've loaded at receiver, and defense is going to be outstanding this year. Just every position group rates in our top 10 nationally. And also I think probably a little bit of motivation too for Ohio State because of, like I said, what Michigan has done. I think there's a little bit of urgency to get this back on track. But if there's a hypothetical matchup, I like Georgia's edge, line of scrimmage, quarterback, and like you said, I'd give the edge to Kirby Smart. I think Ohio State's I think Ohio State gets Georgia on the field. They got a chance to beat them, but I think maybe their best chance is hoping somebody else knocks Georgia out in this scenario if they want to win the national championship.
I was going to ask because, obviously that C.J. Stroud Ohio State Georgia game was the national championship game because Michigan couldn't beat TCU. But that game stylistically was fascinating to watch unfold. I'm curious what type of game this would be in your head.
It's a good question. I think first of all, I think if you're Ohio State, a lot of it's going to depend on how your growth at quarterback is going to be. Let's pick apart Georgia here for a second because this team does have a few, I think, concerns coming into the year. I think number one, I think they didn't stop the run as well as they were a couple years ago. That's obviously when you lose Jalen Carter.
No Jordan Davis, no Jalen Carter.
Yeah, that makes a big difference, right? So you take away a couple of those guys in line of scrimmage, no surprise, they regressed a little bit in run defense. Now, regression is just like still being really good, just not outstanding. And they're losing some guys in the secondary. So I do think there are some, question marks they're going to have to address. Now, could Ohio State just simply line up and run it against Georgia? I don't know. That seems, even with Henderson and Judkins, that seems a little much to ask. So I still think in a game like that, you're going to need Howard, saying Devin Brown, whoever it is, Air Noland, Kindholtz, a quarterback. They're going to need a quarterback to still, I think, be able to push the ball downfield. So, like I said, I'd give Georgia the edge, but you get these two teams on the field.
I totally agree. And especially at the end of the season, you don't know what they're going to look like. I have faith in the offense being pretty damn good. If Kyle McCord's season wasn't good enough, it was a pretty good year. But I'm curious because their strength, as you pointed out, Judkins and Henderson in the backfield, I don't know if that's the way you beat Georgia in a matchup, or maybe it is. So I don't know if it's going to be similar to the CJ Stroud matchup, sling it around, that's how you beat them, or is it more about how like Missouri played Georgia a couple of years ago where it really slowed them down and got them kind of in a dirty game, and maybe that's when Georgia's inability to stop the run at that elite threshold that they had the last couple of years, maybe that's where Ohio State can capitalize. So we're projecting a lot of stuff here, obviously, but I think on paper it's hard to argue they're not the two best teams in college football. Number 3 on the list, the Oregon Ducks. This has got to be one of the highest preseason rankings we have ever given Oregon, right?
I think so. I really like this Oregon team. I think, they get Ohio State in Eugene this year. They have a chance to kind of make a statement in their first season in the Big Ten by knocking off the Buckeyes if they can do it in Eugene. Offensive firepower, there's no question. I mean, if you're rating receiving cores in college football, it might be Oregon, Ohio State 1 and 2 in some order. They've added Evan Stewart to go with Tez Johnson. They're loaded at running back. Offensive line, the tackle pairing of Cornelius and Conley might be one of the best in the country. So I don't have a doubt with Dylan Gabriel leading the offense, they're going to score a ton of points. Defensively too, I like what they did in the portal, getting Jabbar Muhammad, Caldwell, the defensive tackle transfer from Houston. They've really beefed up their defense. So not a ton of flaws, I think, for this Oregon team. I think the question will be that they might get Ohio State twice. That's kind of, can they beat them when it matters in Indy? But otherwise, this team looks pretty dang good to me on paper.
That would be my argument, is that they beat Ohio State the first time they play in Eugene early in the season before Ohio State's sort of perfectly formed, and then Ohio State gets them back in the Big Ten championship game. That would be my line of thinking, and that's why we have Ohio State at 2 and Oregon at 3. Number 4, Texas, and I guess I should just package 5 and 6 here in this conversation. Texas at 4, Ole Miss at 5, Alabama at 6. A little controversy here because if Nick Saban was the coach at Alabama, Alabama's probably number 4. I still think I think I could make the case that we might be a bit early on Texas. Tougher schedule, SEC, lots to replace in the receiving core and tight ends. And then Ole Miss, you're projecting an experiment that's never really been successful before. But boy, do they got a lot coming back. So Texas 4, Ole Miss 5, Alabama 6. Why Texas over the other two SEC teams going into the SEC championship game?
I think, first of all, it's sort of like the continuity, just building off last season. When you think about all the change at Alabama, if Nick Saban was the coach, I actually think we probably have Alabama 3 or 4 and probably wouldn't think too much about it. But there's a lot of new at Alabama. Like, how does this offense all come together? I think there's some question marks at receiver for the Crimson Tide. And certainly Texas has a lot of turnover at receiver too. I really like what they did in the portal. I mean, they brought in a couple guys who I think are just going to be able to step in and go right away. 4 starters back on the offensive line. This is one of the best in the country. Where I do have some concerns about Texas is going to be on the defensive front. You take away Byron Murphy, you take away Tavondre Sweat, stopping the run. We'll see how this group does. You also look at the secondary. They gave up a lot of yards last season. We'll see how the secondary and front all come together. I think they need to get a better pass rush too. So question marks on defense for Texas. But when you compare these 3 teams, I kind of went with continuity here. I just went Texas kind of last year. They're coming off the playoff. They've got good core coming back with Ewers and Sarkisian pairing up for maybe one more year. And when you look at Ole Miss and Alabama, Ole Miss is probably one of the more fascinating teams to me in our rankings just because of all the transfers. Lane Kiffin has had 2 double-digit win seasons in the last 3 years. They're right there. They've addressed their biggest question mark, which is that defense. And they bring in Walter Nolan, guys like Chris Paul, Princely from Florida to be another edge rusher for him. They've got to improve personnel and defense. They're going to score points. The question is, can this all come together? I think Kiffin has showed he can, and I like their schedule. I mean, I know they get Georgia at home. They go to LSU. They go to Florida, but no Texas, no Alabama, no Missouri, no Tennessee. That's a pretty favorable schedule for a team that's pretty loaded on both sides of the ball, I think, on paper.
Yeah, and I think the question there for all 3 of them is what does the next tier look like for the quarterback? And I think Jackson Dart has another level he could get to, I think, easier than the other guys. And that's because Jalen Milroe is changing coaches and already was at a high level. Quinn Ewers has got to stay healthy and I think could go to another level in big games. He was elite in the Big 12 championship game. He was great in the semifinal, but he was pretty solid in the playoff. But there's another tier for all of these guys if they want to be in national championship contention, if they want to be a conference champion and a 1 seed or a 2 seed and playing in the final game. The quarterback taking the next step is going to have to be key for all these guys. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I might pick Jackson Dart to do it, which is weird, which is weird to feel that and say that out loud.
is of these trio of teams, it's weird to say this, but could Jalen Milroe be the one that kind of controls where this trio ends up a little bit? Alabama doesn't play Texas. They don't play Ole Miss. But I guess is the question here, Milroe plus Kalen DeBoer's offense, even if they're not as good a receiver as they have been, if this hits, we saw what Michael Penix and DeBoer did last year.
I lean Bama of the 3, honestly. But the case for Ole Miss is the schedule and sort of the investment. And the case for Texas, as you said, brilliant offensive coach, quarterback, offensive line returning, largely intact. I think there's more questions on the defense than the secondary wasn't all that great last year anyway. Right. But I honestly, these 3 being next to each other is probably exactly right because I think all 3 of them are better than the next group of teams. All 3 I think are probably in the playoff because they can all get to 10-2, and you only got to get to 10-2 at this point to get in. If you're Texas with that schedule or Alabama with that schedule and you're 10-2, I think you're in the playoff. I think Ole Miss at 10-2, probably in the playoff, but nothing guaranteed. Nothing guaranteed. But I think it's a fascinating trio of teams again, and one of those things we're gonna have to get used to in all these big conferences now. They're not gonna play each other.
Yeah.
So
unless it's the SEC championship game, but of course that means that Georgia probably have to lose twice.
They could all be 6-2 or 7-1 and be tied. And we still at time of taping, we do not know what the tiebreaker is in the SEC. I'm assuming it's going to be opponent's strength of schedule in conference or something like that. Win percentage. Once you get down to the third, head to head's obviously number 1. I'm just saying. Yeah. If 3 teams are tied and no one played each other, we're gonna have to deal with this in every conference.
Keep in mind that there was some tweaks of the Big 12 tiebreaker late last year, so technically they have until December 4th or 5th, I guess, to figure this out. So, how comfortable are you with Texas, Ole Miss, Bama in that order? Somewhat. I actually feel pretty well. I don't know. Maybe Texas, I feel good about. I also understand there's probably going to be some doubts. They did it once, sort of prove it. I don't, Texas is back, all that. But I mean, they've got all the pieces to do it again. Alabama's hard. It's hard to say this, that they're kind of the wild card of this group. Like I have more questions than normal, but I also kind of worry about Ole Miss if they have a loss or two early in the season, then maybe they don't quite reach their potential.
Right. Number 7, we go to the Big Ten. Number 7 and number 8, Michigan and Penn State. Penn State has lived right here in this range in our rankings basically every week for 5 years, maybe longer. They are basically outside of the 2020 season. They have basically been number 8 forever. They are a 10-2 team that beats teams that they're supposed to and does not beat the teams they're not supposed to. So I think Penn State with Drew Aller and all the defensive talent and the weapons and a new offense, at least sort of a new offense, I like where they're at. Michigan is far more unknown. And normally you would not see a loaded Power 5 defending champion drop from 1 to 7. But Michigan is replacing so much and its coach that there's a lot more unknown with Michigan than any national champion of recent memory.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's start with the positive for Michigan here. The defense is going to be awesome. Will Johnson, Mason Graham, throw in the linebackers that they got. They're going to be one of the best in the country, which is good because they can lean on that early in the season, and they're going to need to. 5 new offensive line starters. There's a question mark at receiver too. I think they got some nice weapons. Can kind of sort of define a number 1, number 2 option? And Donovan Edwards is really good. Let's just assume that the offensive line falls into place. Oh, by the way, they got to find a quarterback. And I think they left spring kind of with a little bit of mystery there. The good news, though, for Michigan is that I think the schedule's pretty manageable. They have to go to Ohio State. They have to play Texas and Oregon at home, but they don't play Penn State. So I think as far as a first-year schedule with a new coach, new O-line, it's pretty manageable for Sharon Moore. Penn State, like you said, they have kind of lived in this space. The good news is living in this space gets you in the playoff this year. If you're James Franklin, they are 4-16 under James Franklin against Ohio State and Michigan. That is the goal going forward. If you're Penn State, if you want to kind of move up this list from 8 to 3, you got to beat Michigan. There's some turnover this year. Obviously, they don't play, but you have a chance here. And I think it goes back to, number 1, it's got to go back to just a better offense. Drew Aller has to be better, but he also has to have more help. I like the hire of Andy Koltanecki as offensive coordinator coming over from Kansas, but I think Penn State's biggest flaw is still the receiving core. They brought in Julian Fleming from Ohio State. Keandre Lambert-Smith transferred out. Do they have the weapons to make this work? They get 2 really good running backs, and they got a great defense, but I still have question marks about the upside of this offense with the receiving core.
Koltanecki has to get creative with his weapons. That's it. And James Franklin needs to stay out of the way. That would be my advice. Yeah. But I think it's a really good Penn State team. They lost a lot of draft picks, and the defense is like they lost 2 like NFL defensive linemen, and they're still really good along the defensive line. James Franklin has done a good job recruiting, so those 2 teams are fascinating to watch. I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them is in the Big Ten championship game. And that's 4 SEC teams in the top 6 and 4 Big Ten teams in the top 8. The top 8, all Big Ten SEC. So get used to it, unfortunately. Notre Dame, number 9. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. This is a team that I like more and more as the offseason goes along. If Riley Leonard stays healthy, I think Notre Dame is absolutely a playoff team.
Yeah, I think same here. I think, first of all, I think the biggest strength for Notre Dame is going to be their defense. Potentially 4 All-Americans this season. We start with Benjamin Morrison, work our way up to Howard Cross along the defensive line. This defense should be really good. Question marks on offense, no doubt about it. I think they've actually upgraded an offensive coordinator. It's funny to say their offensive coordinator left to be a head coach, hiring Mike Dimbrock from LSU to be offensive coordinator. I think they upgraded a lot. So for an offense that had some question marks last year about how they performed in big games, I think they've got a good quarterback in Riley Leonard, provided he's healthy. They've upgraded offensive coordinator. They've got a couple transfers at receiver that will help. Biggest question is the offensive line. Take away Alt, take away Fisher. How's this group hold up? The good news is schedule is pretty manageable. They get A&M in the season opener, Florida State, Louisville, both come to South Bend. So the schedule was there with this defense. And I think this is kind of a key year for Marcus Freeman too. We're kind of getting to year 3 now. The pieces are there to make a playoff run, and they've spent the resources this time to get the right coordinator. It's right there for Notre Dame to be a top 10 team this year.
I agree. I think this is a sneaky good team. And again, it's all dependent on the quarterback staying healthy. But if he does, I think this team is really sneaky good because I think Denbrock, we saw what he could do with a quarterback with his kind of skills. Jaden Daniels, Riley Leonard's a bigger, stronger, not faster necessarily, but a bigger, stronger version of Jaden Daniels. So I think he could really be unlocked in that system if he can stay on the field, but he's got to stay on the field. Number 10, the Missouri Tigers. Number 11, the LSU Tigers. These are two teams, LSU kind of coming and go. Like, these are two teams that feel like roster-wise, they're going in very strange directions. Like, a lot of offense gone off this LSU team, questions on the defense. Missouri, a lot of senior leadership gone off both sides of the ball, but in particular on the defense. But Brady Cook and Luther Burden coming back, easier schedule for Missouri. And then LSU, it's sort of a trust in Brian Kelly at this point, I think, right?
I think these two teams are connected a bit by Blake Baker, the Missouri defensive coordinator, going over to LSU. So sort of LSU's ranking is helped by taking away Missouri's defensive coordinator. But I think there will be some skepticism of the Missouri Tigers this preseason by some, because they'll probably look at last year as just, hey, they were a 1 year fluke. They were just great, and they're not going to be able to replicate it this year. I think they're staying power. And that's why we've got them ranked so high. I think number one, the offense is going to be dynamic. Brady Cook is back. Luther Burden is back. I think 3 starters back on the offensive line. They brought in some transfers to help out there. So I think they're going to score a ton of points. Where I think they're going to be taking a step back is on the defensive side of the ball. I think Corey Batoon comes over from South Alabama. He was running the defense there with Kane Womack. We'll see how that transition goes. I like the transfers they brought in. Can they maintain that kind of high level of play like they had last year? Not so sure. I do like their schedule. They have to go to A&M and they have to go to Alabama. But outside of that, I don't see too many games on their schedule that they're going to be an underdog in. So they're staying power with that offense plus a favorable schedule.
No Georgia, no Texas, top 2.
Right.
No Tennessee, LSU, and Florida. So there you go.
Yeah, very, very favorable path for a team that is going to be in transition on defense this year. And I think really the big storyline for the SEC this year is not only is there a bunch of really solid teams, but the quarterback play in this league is going to be outstanding this year. So for Missouri, catching that break in scheduling is huge. I think on LSU, we talked about Blake Baker. This is a really kind of fascinating team to sort of pick apart this offseason, because Jaden Daniels was so valuable to the run game on offense. Can they get some actual production from a running back now? And you take away your offensive coordinator, but you do have a good quarterback. I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to be pretty solid for this team. And I like their receivers, maybe one of the best offensive line, for sure, one of the best offensive lines in the country. I don't know what the upside is on defense. Like, I think they can be better, but I don't know if there's the vintage LSU elite all SEC personnel in this group. So I think it'll be better, but maybe not elite. So I think you get some regression on offense, some improvement on defense. Where does that put you? Schedule's not too crazy. Getting Alabama and Ole Miss at home is kind of key for this LSU team. So they've won 10 games back-to-back years. We think 11th puts them right in that 9-10 win range again.
Yeah, I think we're a little high on LSU, but there's a lot of questions there, but very talented, and the coaching staff I trust. Also, Bo Davis on the defensive line helps as well with three NFL players going to the league. All right, so number 12 is Florida State. This is our highest rated ACC team, which makes them our ACC champion, which means they're number 12 in our rankings, but they would be number 3 in the playoff bracket. Am I correct on this?
Yes, you are.
That's a number one reason why we shouldn't have this type of seeding. Florida State could jump from, let's say, 10-3, ACC champion, 12th in the nation, to number 3 seed and a bye in the first round. They're a good team. DJU, Mike Norvell, I trust them, but they are replacing a whole lot on offense, and I don't think you can replicate the perfection with which they played with last season.
Also, I think just in terms of like a power rating, I think they're kind of a step behind some of these teams that we've got in the top 10, like compared to Ole Miss, Alabama, Texas. I think Florida State's, I don't say not real far, but I think they're a step back compared to that group. Florida State's only got 8 returning starters for this season. And so, when you look at returning starter data, it's a little fuzzy. Like, what does it mean for an upcoming year? But I think it's a lot of faith in Mike Norvell and DJU, kind of as you alluded to there. The ACC is kind of wide open. I think Florida State losing some pieces, some question marks about Clemson. You get a lot of kind of a group of wild cards. It's very clustered together at the top. So we like Florida State, sort of trust in Norvell, trust in DJU. I think from the defensive side of the ball, Florida State should be very good. This defensive line, I know they're losing Jared Verse, but Patrick Payton, some of the other guys they have coming in, And also, Mike Norvell does a very good job of bringing in transfers and finding a fit and a way to make it work. So I'm just banking on Norvell will figure this out. They have to go to Miami and they have to go to SMU, but they host Clemson. So not a crazy schedule for Florida State. I think this team will get better progressively during the season, and we like them to be the ACC champ.
I like him to be the ACC champ as well. It's so hard to get over the 12 to and where again whatever they finish 10th. Going from 10th to 3 is ridiculous in the final rankings. All right, a team I think we're a little low on, and I might have ahead of 2 other SEC teams. Number 13, the Tennessee Volunteers. I think it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when Nico Iamaleava becomes a superstar, and the question is, does it happen before they play Oklahoma on the road or not? And otherwise, at Georgia, Bama at home, it's very manageable schedule for Tennessee, and they've got maybe the best defensive line in the conference, which makes them one of the best defensive lines in America. I think we're a little low on the Vols, but I think at 13, it's 9-3 is about where Vegas has them as well.
Yeah, I like this Tennessee team largely just because of Nico. I have some question marks on defense in a big way. I think their secondary could be a real liability again, but they have James Pierce. They have one of the best defensive lines in the country. Yep. That certainly helps. I also think their schedule is pretty manageable. Like you said, 9-10 wins is pretty realistic. Keep in mind, in SEC games last year, Tennessee averaged around 24 points a game. That is very un-Josh Heupel-like. And I think with Nico, you add in Chris Brazzell at receiver. I think their offensive line is going to be outstanding too. They have upgraded at quarterback with Nico taking over from Joe Milton. They will not average 24 points a game in the SEC. And this firepower that Tennessee has offensively, I think puts them squarely in the playoff conversation. So I think to your point, they could easily be ahead of LSU. They could be ahead of Missouri. I think Tennessee's right there in the conversation to be a playoff team this year.
Yep, I really like this Tennessee team. But this is the pack of teams. We just never done this before. We just don't know who's going to be above the line and get in or not. And I think ultimately some of these champions of other leagues, namely the Big 12 and the ACC, as we've talked about on the show, there's a good chance that they are not as good as a 2 or 3 loss team in the SEC, but because they are 12-1 in the Big 12, they're going to be ranked number 4, 5, or 6 instead. So, or a second place team in the ACC or the Big 12. Speaking of number 14, the Utah Utes, our Big 12 champion this year, and at 14 in our power rankings, number 4 in the playoff rankings because they would be the 4th rated conference champion. So they would jump 10 spots in theory, according to our rankings, and get into the playoff as the 4 seed, despite us thinking there are 13 better teams in college football.
I will say, I think I've had a little bit of remorse on Utah's ranking since the magazine went to print. I think they could be a few spots higher. So they were 8-5 last year. It seems strange to say this, but I think they might be a tad undervalued. They're a good rebound candidate for this year. Kyle Whittingham, that's the reason why. They're transitioning, obviously, new leagues, but just faith in Kyle Whittingham figuring this out. They bring back enough on defense to alleviate some of the losses that they have in the secondary. This defense will be outstanding as always. But the big thing is they are getting Cam Rising back at quarterback, and they're getting Brant Keithy back at receiver. So they're getting back and potentially All-America tight end and a top 15 quarterback in college football. I think it's important too. They get Arizona and Iowa State at home this year. They have to play Oklahoma State on the road early, but they don't play Kansas. They don't play Kansas State, and they don't play West Virginia. So these Big 12 teams are going to beat up on each other. But as we've seen, Utah gets better from September to November. A loss on the road at Oklahoma State would not be surprising, but it wouldn't surprise me if this team gains steam as the year goes on. And with that favorable of a schedule, I think Utah is our pick to win the Big 12.
I absolutely love Utah. I'm with you on this one. I think they win the Big 12 as well. I think they're the best team. I think they have the most consistency. They've got the most stability. They've got the most everything. And they also play a brand of football that I think will play well in the short term in the Big 12. So
yeah, I think that physicality on defense and offense is going to be an interesting combo with some of those other teams in the league.
So you've gotten to our 4 byes. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Ohio State. Number 3, Florida State. And number 4, Utah. That will be the 4 bye weeks that would take place, which then would push Oregon, who's actually our number 3 team, down to number 5. So they will host a playoff game against Liberty, which is our highest rated group of 5 team at number 30. So Oregon and Liberty is the 5-12 matchup. The winner of that game will play Utah at a neutral site Go figure. Texas, number 4 in our rankings, gets moved to number 6 and will host a playoff game. And I'm trying to do this all as well on the fly here.
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame is number 11. So Notre Dame gets bumped down 2 spots from 9 to 11 because of the champions. And then you have number 7. Texas moves out. So Ole Miss is number 7. So the Ole Miss Rebels become the 7 seed because they move down 2 spots from Florida State and Utah jumping. And they, of course, then host a home playoff game against
Penn State,
which is, sign me up in the Grove for that. That sounds awesome. And then we get a rematch of the Rose Bowl in Tuscaloosa. Alabama becomes your 8 seed, which is crazy to think about just in general. Alabama is the 8th best team in America. The 8 seed Alabama and the 9-seeded Michigan Wolverines, both with new coaches, matching up in a playoff game. So you have Alabama and Michigan, winner playing Georgia. You have Ole Miss and Penn State, winner playing Ohio State. You have Texas and Notre Dame, winner playing Florida State, and Oregon and Liberty, winner playing Utah. Fascinating bracket.
Which is why if you look at our bracket in the magazine, the teams ranked 5 and 6 go a little ways in the playoff. Our playoff predictions don't necessarily match the highest seeds there, but in general, I think this continues to be my biggest complaint about the playoff. You know, the fact that these games are still played at bowl sites, and also the lack of just pure 1 to 12 power ranking. You know, I don't think it's fair at all that if Oregon is clearly the 3rd best team, and maybe they beat Ohio State during the season, that they're knocked down to number 5, and Texas could lose in the SEC championship game and fall.
Home game's pretty good, though. Home game's pretty good. It's not a bad consolation prize, but I agree, and that's why, again, Oregon and Texas would win those games in theory against Notre Dame and Liberty, and then they would go beat Texas would go beat Florida State, and Oregon would go beat Utah on a neutral field. Yes. That would be our official pick based on our power rankings. So there's your playoff, and it takes us 14 teams plus Liberty to get there. Number 15, the Clemson Tigers. I don't know what to say.
Well, I think we'll start with what we know about Clemson, which is their defense. Despite losing a lot of players, it's going to be pretty good. Only 2 starters back, but I have a lot of confidence in some of the pieces that they have up front. They've got one of the better linebacking cores in college football. The defense should be outstanding. Offensively, less than 24 points a game last year in ACC play. That's a real problem. The coach scouting in the magazine is very high on Cade Klubnik taking a step forward. They're going to need him to. Now, I don't think it's all on Cade Klubnik. You could look at it as Cade Klubnik plus Garrett Riley's offense, 2nd year. You could see some improvement. Clemson needs dudes at receiver, though. And it might come in the form of their freshman class with Wesco and Moore. Some of those guys made a splash in the spring. So I really think kind of a traditional Clemson team. You know what you're getting on defense. Offensively, it comes down to receivers, quarterback play taking a step forward, because you know they have to go to Florida State. They get Georgia in the opener, but Louisville and NC State come to Clemson, and they have to play for Virginia Tech on the road. So there's some landmines there, but Clemson could easily be back in the ACC championship game.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like a 3-loss team in the ACC championship game, or 2 3-loss teams for that matter. But Clemson's too good to not be good, but also not good enough to be great. I don't think. Yeah. So that's, again, we might even be a little high with them at 15. Number 16, the Oklahoma Sooners. A whole lot of new everything. Jackson Arnold time. Very, very difficult schedule. So I think while I agree that this is probably the 16th best team in America, I don't think they're going to finish there, because I think the schedule is way too hard.
I think 16th is a nod to sort of power ranking here. Like on a neutral field, I think Oklahoma is probably 16th or maybe a spot or 2 higher on a neutral field. But the schedule is brutal. 6 teams we have ranked in the top 25 are on their schedule. They're in a new conference, and they lost all 5 offensive line starters.
Yep.
I know Oklahoma fans are tired of talking about the offensive line, but if you look at our coach scouting in the magazine, there's a lot of skepticism from other coaches in the SEC about how it's going to hold up this year. So it continues to be a concern, I think, as we'll see how it meshes in the league. The positives, Jackson Arnold is going to be very good. Love their receiving core. Defense is also trending up. Danny Stutzman, one of the best linebackers in college football. Also, Dominic Williams, the TCU transfer they picked up late, will really help their defensive line. So tough schedule. Offensive line, you know, how fast does it come together? I think by the end of the year, Oklahoma will be better, but they're also going to navigate a pretty brutal schedule to try and get to that 7-8 win mark.
I agree. Number 17, a team I really like a lot, and I think could be sneaky good and be playoff worthy, and that is the Kansas State Wildcats.
Yeah, this is our second Big 12 team, but there's not a ton of separation between some of these other teams we're going to talk about coming up in the Big 12. But biggest reason I think to like Kansas State is Avery Johnson, the quarterback. Just dynamic, all-around player. We saw it in small doses last year. He's the starter now this year. Got a few offensive linemen to replace. Kansas State usually does a pretty good job of filling those spots. And I love the backfield. Like Dylan Edwards and DJ Giddens is going to be dynamic. So they can almost just bludgeon their opponents like Utah, the Big 12 this year with the quarterback and the run game. And they'll
triple
be
option, baby. Triple option, baby.
Yeah,
Run it.
Hey, a Big 12 championship game between Utah and Kansas State might take like 2 hours because how fast they can play with the run game. And K-State's defense will be rock solid, 7 returning starters. But also, talk about schedules in the Big 12. They're going to get Kansas, Oklahoma State, and Arizona, which is not a conference game. It's a non-conference game. They're going to get those games at home. So schedule breaks, plus a breakout quarterback, the stability of Chris Kleiman. I like Kansas State a lot this year, and they're our pick to get to the Big 12 championship.
Well, and you can go lose the game to Arizona. It doesn't matter because it doesn't count in the conference standings. I really like this Kansas State team a lot. Number 18, hand firmly placed. Back on to the burner, Stephen. And this was a team you moved up the rankings late in the process. Texas A&M. The Aggies check in the top 18 in the country. I can already hear the haters talking about why.
Well, I think, first of all, I wrestled a lot with Oklahoma A&M in that ranking. I could be easily convinced.
I think Oklahoma's the better team. I think they have a tougher schedule.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think for A&M, let's start with what we know about A&M. Jimbo Fisher underachieved. They have good players in the program. They've lost some to the transfer portal, but still a lot of talent. Mike Elko, the job that he did at Duke to take that team from winning 5 games in the 2 years prior to his arrival and winning 9 in the first year. Now, granted, it's the ACC. It's a little bit easier, but I think Mike Elko, his experience plus his track record at Duke, this team will be better in year 1. And a lot to like about this team. They've got talent, their defense is good, and they've got a breakout quarterback in Connor Wigman. So I think the pieces are there, and they've also got a pretty favorable schedule. I mean, if you get Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas at home in your first year, if you're Mike Elko, there is 4 big chances to make a splash.
No, I agree with you. I don't like that I agree with you. That's the problem. That's wwhy I feel like I'm putting my hand back on the burner, because I agree with everything you're saying. I really like Mike Elko. I really like this team. I think they're going to be good. Obviously, that's a terrifying thing to say in preseason ranking conversation about Texas A&M. It's just is what it is. But I do believe that it's just different. It's different. So the good part of the different is I think they've worked out some of the culture problems. The bad part of the difference is you just don't know yet. So it's tough. It's tough to pinpoint Texas A&M, but talent not the problem down in College Station. Number 19, Oklahoma State. Staying power for Oklahoma State, you think?
I think so. So remember last year, a lot of people left Mike Gundy out in the cold after that 2-2 start. Oklahoma State's done. They went to the Big 12 championship game. Nice job for Mike Gundy last year, and they bring back 20 starters this year. So they are well positioned to replicate another run to the Big 12 championship game. Ollie Gordon is back at running back. They've got a solid offensive line, though. I think really the key here for Oklahoma State, if they want to go from, we got them finishing 19. If they want to finish ahead of Utah, Kansas State, quarterback play, Alan Bowman has to be better. I think in terms of upside, I think relative to like Jalen Daniels, Noah Fafita, some of the other quarterbacks in the league, I don't know that Alan Bowman has that kind of upside. I think he's really solid, but not the upside. Defensively, they got to be better at getting to the quarterback and all those things. So some questions for this Oklahoma State team. They go to K-State, they get Utah at home. They've got some other tricky road games at Big 12 play, but 20 returning starters from a team that made the Big 12 championship game last year. I think they'll be rock solid again this year.
Yeah, it's a high floor, it feels like, for this team. I don't know how high the ceiling is, but I think it's a high floor. Miami, number 20. Talk about volatility and not being able to predict high floors and high ceiling. They have a very high ceiling, honestly, this Miami team with their personnel. As I've said on the show many times, I just don't trust the coaching staff. So 20 is probably about right. Because if Nick Saban's coaching this team, they're probably like number 7 or something.
They're the ACC favorite for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or even like 11th maybe. But they come in at number 20 in our rankings.
So speaking of putting our hand on the burner and being prepared to get burned again, why not go with Miami, right? I do think I don't want to overhype this team, but they did improve by 2 wins last year, and they had a third one had Cristobal just not made a dumb decision to blow it against Georgia Tech. I've mentioned this on the show before, Braden. There is a lot of skepticism in the ACC coach scouting about the head coaching staff for Miami. So other coaches in the ACC are not exactly high in this coach staff. That being said, we've got them pretty high in our rankings at number 20. But I think they've upgraded a quarterback with Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, top 15 running back in college football, offensive line for Miami, one of the top 10 in the country. And defensively, I like what they've got up front. I'm a little bit worried about their secondary. I don't know they did enough in the portal to solidify that group. But Florida State plays at Miami. They also get Virginia Tech at home, toughest road games at Florida and Louisville. Pretty manageable schedule for a team that's got a ton of talent. Kind of the same thing as A&M, got a ton of talent. Does it all come together this year?
Yeah, I am fascinated. There's certain teams that I am just utterly fascinated with. Ole Miss is one of them. Miami is one of the most interesting teams in all of college football this year. Like
probably the biggest wild card, maybe.
Super talent at quarterback and offensive line. Like sign me up. Like, you know what I mean? But man, just what do we make of what's going to happen in game management and development? It's just a giant question mark. Don't know. So I think 20 is pretty fair, actually. Number 21, the Kansas Jayhawks. Talk about a team that's kind of the opposite of that. A team that you just absolutely trust, a coaching staff you trust to maximize their players' abilities. If Jalen Daniels stays healthy, this Kansas team could be very, very dangerous.
I'm going to make a crazy statement because you probably would have asked me to speak to family members or sought help from me if I said this 5 years ago. Kansas can win the Big 12 this year. That's not crazy. First of all, it just goes to what Lance Leipold has done as a head coach year-over-year development. Also, they're getting Jalen Daniels back at quarterback. A lot of talk about quarterbacks with Fafita and Shedeur Sanders in the Big 12. I think Jalen Daniels is the best quarterback in the Big 12. I've got him number 1 in my power rankings. So I think getting him back is huge. I know they lost Andy Koltanecki to Penn State. I like Jeff Grimes coming over from Baylor. I know it didn't necessarily work out, but I think that style will play well with what Lance Leipold in Kansas has done. Question marks, offensive line, 3 new starters. They got some turnover on the defensive front. So line of scrimmage needs to be solidified. But I think this Kansas team with no Utah, they don't play Oklahoma State. They don't play Arizona. They have to go on the road to K-State. I think if Jalen Daniels is as good as he was, 2 years ago, this Kansas team can get to the Big 12 championship game and win it.
I agree. Somebody asked me recently, who's your sleeper in the Big 12? I was like, Kansas.
Yeah.
I don't even know if it's a sleeper really. Because they're not going to be the favorite. So, all right, number 22, the USC Trojans, Lincoln Riley, no Caleb Williams, new conference. This is also one of the most interesting teams in college football.
Yeah, I think a lot of questions for this USC team. I mean, let's start at the line of scrimmage, right? I mean, a lot of turnover in the offensive line. They've got to be way better on the defensive front. They've just got to be way better on defense, period. I think getting D'Anton Lynn to come over as the new coordinator from UCLA did a really good job with that group at UCLA, taking over the play calling duties at USC. They've upgraded a coordinator. They seem to have a much better defensive staff. The proof will be in the results. I mean, Lincoln Riley's got to put a good defense on the field, even more critical as they go into the Big Ten. So question marks for me about how the defense improves, offensive line. I'm not so much worried about the quarterback. I think Lincoln Riley's track record tells us that if it's Miller Moss or Jaden Maivia, they'll be fine. So this is kind of a nod to talent. They underachieved last year. I think they rebound to some extent. They almost have to be better on defense. They can't be as disastrous. They actually have a coordinator that knows what he's doing now. So a little bit of a nod to that. They get things fixed, and we think they finished pretty solid 22 in their debut in the Big Ten.
Well, and sort of with Oregon as well. It's fascinating. Normally when a team changes conferences, it is stepping up in competition. And while I think the Big Ten is a better league than the Pac-12 in general, last couple of years, it has not necessarily been. So, I mean, Oregon State was a really good team in the Pac-12 the last few years. So what's interesting is you could argue that the schedule's not easier necessarily, because I don't think it is, but they're capable. These teams are capable because the Pac-12 was so much. It's not like going from the American to the Big 12. or going from the Big 12 to the SEC. I mean, if anything, it is a like for like switch from a schedule standpoint. And so while the road trips are harder, I don't think the schedule's harder for USC. So I think USC and Oregon should be equipped. Washington's a different story because everything's new. UCLA, different story. Everything's new. But with USC and with Oregon, I think the schedule, you could argue, is about the same. That it's not a huge adjustment for them other than the travel.
I think the biggest thing for USC is they have talent. I mean, I know their defense wasn't very good, but you could watch some of their players. Okay, the right coordinator could really work with Bear Alexander, Eric Gentry, and some of those other guys. So I think there's just a base level of improvement that you kind of expect from this defense, and then you just expect they'll have a good firepower. Like, they're not hurting for talent. They're much like Miami and A&M in a way that the right coaching fixes this offseason could get this team back. I still think they are way behind Oregon and Ohio State right now.
Yeah.
But I do think they're an interesting team because of all the new, but I think they're pretty solid top 25.
So the number 5 team in the Big 10 is number 22 USC. And the number 5 in the Big 12. Is that right? Yeah. The number 5 team in the Big 12 is number 23, Arizona.
Former conference mates there in the Pac-12, so I guess appropriate they are.
So weird.
Clustered together there in the rankings. But yeah, I think Arizona is a hard team to get a read on to some extent. And it seems weird to say that because you look at that pass catch combo of Fafita and McMillan. It's dynamic. They're going to put up points. I love the hire of Dino Babers as offensive coordinator. I think that's really cool for Britt Brennan. I do think, though, in terms of these contenders in the Big 12, what worries me is their defense got a lot better last season after really struggling the previous 2 years. Johnny Nansen was their defensive coordinator. He's now at Texas. Dwayne Aquina, new play caller for Arizona. They've lost some guys up front, and I think that could be a problem, especially when you play some of these Big 12. I mean, I guess, now Big 12 teams like K-State and Utah that are probably going to pound teams on the ground.
Yep.
Worry about their defense, overall transition. I think they're going to score a ton of points, but I think as far as this offseason kind of moved them down a little bit. I'm a little bit more worried about their transition than I was a few months ago. Still solid, but maybe a little bit behind the Utah and K-States of the world in the Big 12.
I feel like we're living a little bit off last year with Arizona here on this ranking, but we'll see. 24 Louisville, 25 NC State, rounding out our top 25, 2 ACC teams that are basically dead even. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them is playing in the ACC championship game. A lot of it depends on a transfer quarterback staying healthy and doing the things that the coach wants them to. But in Jeff Brom, I trust. And Dave Doran and Tony Gibson have done an excellent job building stability at NC State. These are high quality programs, and I think either one of them could easily find their way into the ACC championship game.
Yeah, it's interesting how both teams are they're 24 and 25. They're kind of connected. I think for Louisville, what's interesting about this team is 9 returning starters on defense. I think their defense is going to be really good. I think Quincy Riley and Ashton Gelati, 2 names probably most people haven't heard. The cornerback and the defensive lineman could be preseason All-Americans. So they're going to be set on defense. It's the offense that comes into the year with a little bit of uncertainty. But if we're talking about a Jeff Brom team with uncertainty on offense, they're probably going to figure this out. Tyler Shuck's just got to stay healthy, though. That's the biggest thing. He hasn't been able to do it, but if he can, I think the Shuck and Brom combo, they're going to put up a ton of points with some of the transfers they brought in at receiver. Also, pretty manageable schedule. Miami comes to Louisville. They go on the road to play Kentucky, Clemson, Notre Dame, but all those are very winnable. I think NC State at 25, we might be a spot or two low on them. The more I look at this team, much like Louisville, a very manageable schedule. Yes, they are losing some guys on defense, only 5 starters back. They, some turnover on offense as well. I actually think their skill spots on offense are in way better shape than they were at the end of last year. They're deeper at receiver. They've added some transfers at running back, and of course, Grayson McCall. Robert and I produces good offense. I think their offense will get better as the season goes along, and I think we trust Tony Gibson on defense. So we got them 25. I think they could be a handful of spots higher. One of these ACC teams is probably going to be undervalued, and it might be NC State.
Really good, really important non-conference game in Charlotte, I believe, against Tennessee.
Yes.
Which is going to be very good. I actually think if you're talking about trust, NC State, stability, Louisville, trust, Kansas at 21, I trust. Those 3, I trust a lot more than, say, USC, Miami, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State. Like I trust NC State, Louisville, and Kansas a lot. These 3 teams at the bottom 5. Do not be surprised if those 3 finish higher in our rankings, because stability and coaching is going to be so important as we go through this chaos that is 2024 college football. So there you have it. There's our top 25. Again, reminder, West Virginia 26, Virginia Tech 27, Iowa 28, Iowa State 29, and Liberty 30. So where can people buy a preseason college football magazine, Stephen?
So the good news is they'll be hitting newsstands on June 4th. You might find them a day or 2 early in some spots, bookstores, grocery stores. AthlonSports.com will have them up in our online store real soon for you to order. So 2 places to order the best preseason magazine in the business.
And you have worked your ass off to get these magazines out the door and into your hands. So everybody go support good companies doing good work like Athlon Sports and Stephen Lassan. I was merely a ranking Sherpa this year, and it was all Stephen. So if you hate the rankings, blame him. If he gets it all right, give him credit. So
if we get it right, credit Braden, right?
No. I don't get any credit.
Yeah.
I don't get credit like at my house with anyone in my family. It's not how it works. But thank you all for listening. Of course, if you are checking us out on the YouTube page, give us a little thumbs up. We do appreciate it. A little subscription there. And we do appreciate you guys for hanging out with us if you're doing that. Otherwise, if you're on the podcast feed, thank you so much. Give us a rating and a review. That would really, we really would appreciate that. Otherwise, Stephen, is that about it? Is that all we got?
I think that's it. I think we've run through the top 25, and we'll talk more this offseason about other conferences in 26 through 134. So stay tuned.
And we'll get into lots of rankings debates as well. So we do appreciate you guys hanging out. For Stephen Lassan, I am Braden Gall. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you guys next week.